Sean Barnard back in the building virtually. Fox Philly sports gambler, founder of Pick Swap Media, man. It's great to see you, man. Bumped into you in Vegas. How are things?
Yeah, can't complain. It was nice catching up, seeing you over there at Summer League. That was my first time out there for Summer League, so one of the cooler experiences that I've had here. But I'm excited that it's finally the time for NBA season to fully get here. Checking out some preseason basketball. I'm hyped up and ready to go, man.
All right, here's the question, Sean. Will Paul George bring a championship to Philly?
I I think he will. I feel good about this. And I mean, I think less about Paul George specifically and more about that specific piece that's been so desperately missing on the Sixers team. I think Joel Embiid's in a better mind space and really maturity level than he's been throughout the entirety of his career. And I just love how the trio of Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid fits together. For me, that is the perfect way to build a trio in today's NBA with a true big man, with a true wing, and with a true guard in the three of them there. So I'm very excited about how this team can look.
All right. Joel didn't do it with Jimmy. He didn't do it with Ben. He didn't do it with Harden. Why will this be different? Why? Tell me.
I mean,
Tell me, Sean.
my number one answer is I do think it's a different Joel, that I think he's past the point of I want to win MVP. I want to be all these accolades. I think he's understood that the missing thing on his legacy is always going to be playoff success and a championship. I think each of these guys, I think Paul George, to be honest, is kind of at that point in his career as well, that I think the critiques of Paul George to me apply to him when he's a number one or a number two. I think it's kind of a different situation when he is really the third star, because I do think it should be clear that that's kind of the hierarchy here in Philadelphia. It's Joel Embiid, it's Tyrese Maxey, and then it's Paul George. That Paul George is fitting into this team, which I think is important there, that there's a foundation built. So I think Joel's ready to be a little bit more malleable in the way and the style that he plays. I think Nick Nurse is the championship coach to get it out of him. And I'm really excited about, like, in year two with Nurse, with Joel, for what this team could really look like.
It's interesting. Nobody has praised PG-13. I guess he's not PG-13 anymore, right? He changed his number?
PG8 here.
PG-8. Okay. Well, over the years, I pushed back. Max, you have to prove a little bit more until he's the number two. I think.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Like, the ideal thing here is obviously they work together as a trio, and that this is everybody on the same page here. I'm a believer in what I saw from Maxey, that I don't think this is fool's gold here. But ultimately, like, the trio's got to work together. To me, what I'm most excited about, I'm ready for Joel Embiid to not be having to be the guy leading the league in scoring as he has been for the past 3 seasons here. So I think each of them are going to take a whole lot of weight off of him.
All right. So I have a question for you.
Hit me.
Has Joel Embiid really lost 20 to 25 pounds?
I do think that is a training camp exaggeration. I won't lie about that one there. I think it's a stretch of the truth, but I think it's still a sign of moving in the right direction. I do think from my eyes, he looked a little bit lighter. It's going to be a work in progress. I think the lightest he can get, the better, when factoring in his knees and style of play, all these things. I do think 25 to 30 is probably a little bit of a stretch there.
All right. He's been saying that it's not about the awards. It's all about the championship. Do you feel that's the way he'll actually go when things start to get competitive? When he sees Cat playing in New York doing his thing, when he sees Jokic in another MVP season, who knows? Luka might win it this year. The way LeBron's looking, I mean, who knows, man? Maybe he'll win MVP playing with his son Bronny. But do you think he'll really keep that? Because, you know, there's been times where I think the Sixers organization, you could correct me if I'm wrong, they kind of wanted him to take a step back. He didn't want to do it. He kept playing. Do you believe Joel when he says this is the goal and I'm not worried about anything else? Like, is there a world where Joel could average, I don't know, 23, 24 points, PG-13 and PG-8 and Ty are just picking up everything. They're averaging 20 themselves and they could win this as a collective. Like, you think Joel would be okay with that?
Yeah, I honestly do. And to be honest, that's my preference. Is, like, as I mentioned, he's led the league in scoring the past 3 years. Last year, not truly counting because of the games played. I don't want that to be the case this year. It shouldn't be. That this has to be a team basketball performance here. I want him to take a statistical step back, and I do think that he's ready for that. It's a bit of a two-way street, that we've seen Joel not have the guys to lean on, and he also has to be willing to lean on those same guys. I do think, like, with the Jimmy Butler situation, that was not this same version of Joel, that I think he's improved leaps and bounds through then. With the James Harden stuff, the style of play, like as much as the pick and roll was super dynamic, it just became so robotic and you knew what they were going to do on an every possession basis. I think with having a little bit more flexibility, and another thing that Joel has been pretty open about is he wants to grow as a playmaker. He took a large leap in that last year, over 5 assists per game, a career high in him. I think he takes another step in that, and they kind of feed, even you look at some of the Lakers tape, like it's clear they're leaning into that as well, playing through Anthony Davis. I think Nurse is adapting that same style. So I think we're going to see Embiid as more of a hub as a playmaker in a way that hasn't been the case. And I think overall that accomplished a lot of this together.
During the course of last playoffs, I mean, I felt like two things could be true. He was destroying everybody, and it probably wasn't the safest to play for him. I don't think he might have been at like 70% at most when he was playing against the Knicks. It was pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, and that's, to be honest, like Joel always kind of gets the double edge of that sword there. If he doesn't play, he's going to get called soft or he's not doing that. And then he does play and he's clearly not 100%. And he still played very well, by the way. Like as much as like people want to make him this playoff dropper, he was pretty great in that
No,
playoffs.
he averaged 30 against the Knicks, right?
Yeah, he had a 50
Yeah.
point game. He had a triple double one game.
Yeah.
Ridiculously good in that. So I respect him for battling as much as he does. I don't think he gets quite enough credit for that, and not nearly the playoff dropper that I think it's oftentimes made out to be. He's had his clunkers for sure. There's no dodging that. But I like the version of Joel that showed up last year. I like that he went down swinging, and just hopefully we can get one stretch where he gets a fully healthy playoff run.
Yeah, I feel like the drumming signing has been an underrated one because yes, he's not a modern big, but his talent actually defies that because he's still such a valuable player in the NBA. And then he's probably more valuable to the Sixers because now Joel will probably do some kind of load managing at some point, and you'll still be able to have Andre Drummond in there, the greatest rebounder to ever live in his estimation.
That's right. He's thrilled to be back in Philadelphia, which I think is very cool too. He obviously was a part of the James Harden deal that was traded out to initially bring James to Philly. That is going to be the guy they lean on as, like, I would guess at least 30 plus games that Drummond starts. I think that the Sixers are going to enter with the game plan of Joel's not reaching this game limit no matter what. We're addressing that from the forefront, and Drummond is a key part of that. That I think Embiid trusts him in a way that he hasn't with a lot of centers, a way that he certainly didn't with Paul Reed last year. So I think that there's going to be help with a lot of that give and take. And Drummond's really solid, man. He's just a really solid NBA player. And by the way, splashed a nice corner three in tonight's preseason game. So we'll see.
I saw you tweeting. Let them know where they can find you on Twitter. Let
Yeah,
them know right now.
Add Sean_Barnard1. So yeah, still grinding some preseason tape.
It's interesting also that this team is very different from a roster perspective, right? Well, like, what are you excited about this roster going into the season?
The most athleticism and athletic wings, I guess I would say. Caleb Martin, I think, is an awesome addition. Ali Oubre going to take another step in game two. It feels like they're finally leaning into just surround Joel Embiid with these athletic wings that can be dogs on the defensive end. Caleb Martin, especially, I'm really excited about that signing there. Gershon Yabusele, another guy who fits a similar archetype there. So there's a lot more versatility as far as positionless basketball, which the Sixers really have not caught up to the modern NBA and how much that is pressed. So I'm excited to see that this year.
All right. So what's the biggest X factor outside of Joel's health for this upcoming season for the Sixers?
Yeah, the number one thing I would say most Sixers fans will point to is rebounding, and I think that is a fair concern. Like, as much as I'll praise Joel, that's not something that I would consider his number one strength there. He gets a ton of rebounds because he's huge and plays by the basket a ton, but he's not a particularly gifted rebounder. So I think that power forward spot's a little up for grabs. They currently have Caleb Martin slated to do that, which clearly isn't his natural position. I would like to see Yabusele be capable of pushing him for that starting job there. So he's really the biggest X factor on this team. He obviously shined with Team France in the Olympics in that silver medal match, or winning silver medal with them there. He looked really good in preseason game one. Feels like he's got a lot better feel for the game than I expected. And a guy clearly hungry for his second chance in the NBA. So that power forward spot, and if Yabusele can make a true run at it, is really what I got my eyes on.
Well, I could just see some Drummond Joel lineups just like crushing some of the worst teams, right? Maybe just a little bit. What do you think? You think they'll ever? You think Nick will ever go with that lineup?
I mean, Nick Nurse is certainly willing to try things, so it wouldn't completely shock me. There was like 2 or 3 possessions in Drummond's first go around, and that was under Doc Rivers that we tried it. It was mainly like end of game kind of rebounding situations, but it wouldn't shock me. Both these guys are more flexible, or can kind of, like, Embiid is perfectly content just spacing up with the 3-point line or in the mid range there. So I wouldn't mind at least seeing if it could work.
All right. Tell me if I'm crazy, Sean, but I kind of got this conspiracy theory about the Sixers right now, and it revolves around Jared McCain. You watched him play in Summer League, not too impressive. Mm-hmm. Now, everything out of the Sixers camp is he's the greatest thing ever. Everybody's talking highly of him. We got Kawhi out in Clipperland saying he's impressed by nobody. Joel is super impressed by this guy. I mean, everything's great around Jared. But, Daryl, he doesn't care about rebuilding. He doesn't care about rookies. He's a win now type guy. The Sixers need a 4. Can you see a Jared McCain package for maybe some 4 out there? That's what I'm seeing. I saw, and also, look, I've been, I always pull up my receipts. I pull out the Julius stuff when they were like, oh, he's so locked in. Like, this is going to be a great season for him. He's looking forward to it. I said it on B-Ball Breakdown. This guy's going to get traded. I have a feeling that Jared McCain, they're featuring him here. He actually had some nice shots today, some nice threes. Do you think they'll trade him at some point, or you think they're going to keep this guy?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a possibility. And I think like when factoring in like draft night, it really came down to Jared McCain or Dalton Connect. I think it's fair to assess that
Ooh.
Connect is a cleaner fit on the Sixers team.
But so many players, so many teams passed on him that should have took him.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And he looked very impressive from what I've seen from him. I like both the guys for what it's worth. But I think in Daryl Morey's calculations with that is McCain still 19 years old, or I believe he just turned 20 now, 19 at the time of the draft. At that point, there was not a Paul George signing, that this was a guy who carries some trade value, is a highly touted prospect, look good at Duke, still very young, and is a guy that fits on every team in a way like a guy like Connect would not. So I do think that was factored in the back of the mind at the time, particularly because the George signing was not official yet. And then I think that carries into the season. Packaging that with like a KJ Martin contract and seeing what you can really make happen is absolutely something that will be on Morey's mind. Now, on the other side of things, I really like Jared, and I do think that there is a role for him on this
There
team.
you go. There you go. You're part of it. You're building them up.
I guess like it's interesting to me. They got to decide what they want as a role for him. To me, I just think he's a real deal elite shooter. Like he had a no dip 3-pointer today. He hit 3 3-pointers in the first half of the preseason game. I would like to see him get a chance for this team. And I think sometimes they rush to kick young talent out the door in favor of win now pieces. So I'm not in as much of a rush to trade him as I would maybe say the general consensus is, but I definitely think that's a part of Daryl Morey's mindset there.
Speaking of Morey, you think he kicked the tires on Julius? The team needed a 4.
Possible. I think it's probably unlikely. I don't see Julius Randle as kind of a missing piece on this Sixers team, certainly at the time. And I think it would have been a little clunky with Joel there. So it would have surprised me if there was anything, but I'm sure Daryl has made the phone calls to everyone that will answer him for sure.
Yeah, that's what he does. That's what he does. Who's a 4 that you think the team could be looking at?
Uh, it's tough to say a few names. I guess like one that I've looked at is maybe whoever kind of falls out of favor in the Oklahoma City Thunder situation. A ton of young talent there. There's a couple guys that I have my eyes on, but it's gonna kind of, I think number one for Daryl Morey is purely identify the Sixers team. Let's see what's missing, and he's been pretty open about keeping those draft picks on the market. But maybe something along those lines. There's not a full name that I have my eye on just yet.
All right. You seem like a fearless Sixers fan to me, but did you get a little scared when you saw Cat going to the Knicks or not at all? Nothing. Tell me, what were you thinking?
So my constant critique of the Knicks throughout, like obviously the war that happened in this playoffs and throughout, is I did question their top end talent there. I do think this moves the meter a little bit for me, that I think that it makes sense for me. Cat's absolutely a cleaner fit than Julius is. But I guess the other side of things is I think they kind of just expanded their weakness as well. As we've seen for years here in Philadelphia, of Joel Embiid just absolutely dominating Karl-Anthony Towns. And you can spit a bunch of metrics that I've looked into as far as his defense seeming better. But to me, I think that's only because that he's played next to Rudy Gobert and in a really defensive friendly system out there in Minnesota. The wings, lengthy wings, guys, that all these types of things. So I'm kind of licking my chops to the Joel Embiid and Karl-Anthony Towns 1-on-1 matchup. Towns is also like a pretty constant foul out guy that I expect we'll see a lot of that in those type of matchups. But it also pushes Joel on the other side of the floor, is that he doesn't like defending the 3-point line. So it's going to be an interesting chess match here. It did increase my respect for the Knicks to an extent, for sure.
So you thought it was the right move?
Yeah, I feel bad because this is kind of a pure business move. I have a ton of respect for both Cat and Julius, what they did for their respective franchises, but I think it did make the Knicks better. And honestly, this might be a bit of a hot take, but I think they're going to miss Dante more than they miss Julius this year.
You're not the only person that has said that. I mean, look, he was their second leading scorer in the playoffs. Yeah.
He's very good.
Yeah, I know you probably don't think about Minnesota too much, but I've been like wondering like who they're going to start, because if you start Naz Reid and Rudy, Ant has to play the 1, right? And then if you start like Rudy could come off the bench, but that won't happen. And then you could start Mike Conley. Like, you ever thought about who could start for this team at this point?
Yeah, I think you got to keep Ant at the two, and I love Mike Conley, so I'm very much in favor of making sure that he's in the picture there. It's going to be an interesting piece of the puzzle. I think ultimately that both Julius and Rudy start, and you are jamming a lot into here, so I don't love kind of any angle I look at it. As a whole, I hate the trade for Minnesota.
So Jaden doesn't start, you think?
Probably at this point, I would say yes. There, I would say he doesn't.
Okay. So that's interesting because I feel like you would need his defense. That is interesting. That is one other way you could do it. Yeah.
It's gonna be tight. They're gonna have to play around with that for sure.
Yeah. All right. So who's the biggest threat to the Celtics and why do you think it's the Sixers?
Yeah, you did answer it both ways there, but I do think it's the Sixers. And from the matchup standpoint here, like I just really love when building in the modern NBA, having the trio the Sixers do with the big man, with the wing, and with the guard. That's something that I really think is important to hang your hat on. I think Paul George, while he's not quite a Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, he's at least a guy that can look him in the eyes in sort of a one-on-one situation. He's certainly the best kind of just true version of a wing that the Sixers team has had. And like we've lived through the Tobias Harris era for quite some time. And it's just even crazy in what we've seen so far for just every single basketball quality that just Paul George is slightly better at, which makes such a difference here. I think Embiid is kind of the ultimate trump card and like a player that nobody can truly match up with. And if he can get that healthy run, I'm feeling really good about this team. And I think people are still underselling Tyrese Maxey a little bit. I think there's a real chance that we're talking about a potential all NBA movement for Tyrese Maxey at the end of this year. And I think he's as real deal as it comes. So I expect another leap there. So for me, the answer is the Sixers, and I'll add in the added defensive versatility with just the bench that is brought.
It's interesting because the way people are talking about Maxi, I think I underrate him. I really do. I think like because to me, PG's the second guy. That's how I look at it.
I think he's the real deal. He's the truth.
Mhm. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think Maxey's a dude that is first off improved leaps and bounds every season, and it's been really cool for a guy that like truly had very little expectation when being drafted 21st, and then he's just been thrown into every role. That he first was thrown in the starting point guard role because Ben Simmons was holding out, and then when kind of falling into his own, that he found his stride there, and then all of a sudden Joel Embiid looks around, he said, wow, this is my second best player. This is my guy here. And then he improves to a real deal all-star last year. So one most improved, real deal all-star, still just 23 years old, has been a guy that has been top 5 in three-point percentage in 2 separate seasons already in his career. I'm really excited for what he can do, and I think he can take another playmaking leap too. So he was awesome in the playoffs last year. He's been a riser. I'll buy as much Maxey stock as I can get.
Okay, you seem to be a little bit higher on him than me. So let me ask you this. Joel will probably manage somewhat when it comes to minutes. Maxey will probably improve because he's a younger player. He's a rising star. Will we see a time in the near future where that torch is passed and Maxey will be the guy?
Yeah, absolutely. There will be a Maxey era in Philadelphia. And I think for Joel specifically, like there's a way where this works with him and then, of course, beyond him, where kind of how we talked about in the statistical regression, where Joel's just deferring to him a little more. I think that continues. And I think we'll see flashes of that throughout this year. We even really saw it in the playoffs last year against the Knicks, where from a physical standpoint, with Joel not having it, it's Tyrese, you got to take us home here. And the kid delivered. So I do think we see more and more in that. And I think if you zoom out to the super long term, that we're talking about a Tyrese Maxey era in Philadelphia post Joel Embiid, which is cool that there is that guy to carry the baton.
So you project to see a Tyrese Maxey that could be the best player on a championship team?
Certainly not this year, but I think in the long run, yes. So I do think like age 28 Tyrese Maxey, we can comfortably have that conversation.
Wow. So last thing, did you hear the Okafor thoughts on Colangelo?
Yeah, those were dark
yeah,
times.
Yeah, what did you make of that? Because like Drummond, I mean, he's not as good as Drummond, but his game doesn't fit the modern NBA. Do you think Colangelo hurt him in that regard, or do you feel like it was just he wasn't good enough?
The short answer is he wasn't good enough. For Okafor specifically, he was a big man who had a under 20% defensive rebounding rate for most of his career, certainly here in Philadelphia. Like there were real deal basketball issues for why it didn't work. But what he is right about is what I think the biggest mistake Colangelo made with him specifically is you held on to him too long. This was at the time when you drafted Okafor, Embiid, and Noel. And then they just kind of let him figure it out. And that was kind of harmful to all of these guys. And then Okafor kind of hinted at like the burners and everything else that was going on. I think like to an extent, that's why there's such like dying loyalty to Joel Embiid here is Joel's been a guy who has lived through all of that, stuck with it and still come out this MVP caliber player versus like we've seen a lot of guys crumble, and like there really was not that stability for Joel to grow from when you look at a ton of other organizations. So Okafor is right about how dysfunctional it was, and I do think he got the short end of the stick to an extent, even though the bottom line is he just wasn't quite good enough.
It's such an underlying basketball conversation, even taking Okafor out of it. Like, how much of it was a player just wasn't good enough? How much was it politics? I always lean on the side that, like, if you are good enough,
Yeah.
you will probably end up where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And for Okafor specifically, like he's one of the ultimate wrong era type guys for me. That I think if he was
Yeah.
born in the 80s or 90s or whatever, like we're talking about him as maybe an all-star talent, all-star caliber talent there. That is not the case. And he's obviously very post heavy. And to be honest, wasn't even incredibly efficient from the post during his NBA opportunities. So he tried. I hope he gets another chance. He's a guy who I was well liked, and I personally like enjoyed the flashes that he did show in Philly. But yeah, I don't think he was made for this era of the NBA, and I do think that ultimately he just wasn't good enough is the answer.
Well, the good thing is that the Sixers are in much better times these days, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Shaw, great stuff. You're always welcome back on the show. Where can we find you? Social media, everywhere else?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Sean_Bernard1 there. You can check out Sixers Digest as well as some Phillies Digest, get into a little baseball stuff for this playoff run there over on YouTube. And always check out Fox Sports The Gambler here in Philadelphia, 1025 on the dials and over on the iHeart app. So talking on there pretty much as often as I can.
You're probably talking a lot lately. I feel like the Sixers have been bubbling up in the zeitgeist. Like everybody wants to talk about them lately.
Yeah, they're an intriguing team, and they're certainly the most stable that they've been through at least the last couple decades, and that's been really nice to see. So I'm very excited about the way this team is trending and what they're going to look like this year.
It's going to be an exciting season. Sean, great stuff. You're always welcome back on the show, and talk soon.